when I first saw the first dune buggies, they were in Pismo Beach, California, and they weren't Volkswagens yet. They were made out of old pieces of Detroit iron, Ford, Chevy, Dodge, so forth. They had an engine welded and transmission welded right up to the rear axle. And at the ends of each axle was 2 or 3 wheels welded together and a pair of frame rails that went way out there about 10 or 20 feet to front wheels. And this was a dune buggy. They were called water pumpers. They were heavy, clumsy, inefficient. They got stuck a lot. But I saw a Volkswagen floor pan without a body on it, without any changes other than that, on stock wheels and tires, just motoring around the sand dunes. No problem. Making these water pumpers look pretty silly. Well, that sent me home thinking. Just think what you could do with that. And so I decided I would, I remember my wife, she says, "Oh my God, what is it now?" Little piece of paper sticking out of every pocket. And I came up eventually with what we call the Meyers Manx. I didn't name it. She, at that time, Winnie worked at Road and Track magazine, and she, no, that's a different wife. Shirley was Road and Track's editor for advertising, and she took what was becoming the Meyers Manx and showed it to the people in the office, pictures of it. She said, "We got to get a name for this thing." Well, they all came up with Manx out of a lot of other names, and the names were things like Roadrunner and Skedaddle-Doo and various things, but Manx seemed to be it. It was the publisher's wife, Elaine Bond, who said, "And it should be Meyers Manx. That'll be important someday." Well, I didn't really want that because I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm the kind of a guy that goes into a schoolroom when I was in the 7th grade and I'd sit in the back row hoping that the teacher never saw me. But that kind of quiet attitude didn't help here. So it was called the Meyers Manx. And I thought maybe I'd build 15 or 20 of them for my friends and myself. And I don't know why I did it. That's another thing. People ask me, why did I do this? Well, I guess I'm a tinkerer, always have been. I love mechanical things. My art education is the other part of it. I spent many, many years to be a painter, and I can draw very well. I used to teach life drawing and so forth. And so teaching life drawing, of course, is something beyond just drawing well. You have to have a sense of the animate. The animate, to be drawn correctly, should have a sense of movement, and they refer to it as gesture. Well, my life drawing experience probably drew some of that to the car. The car has a sense of gesture, and I like to think that it came out of that part of my life. But the other thing was that I was working in sailboat companies building great big sailboats, fiberglass offshore sailboats, which never had steel frames in them. They were always fiberglass and panels. They were interconnecting shear panels and fiberglass skin. And a sailboat's a big, powerful thing that can sail around the world in storms. And I didn't see there was any reason for a dune buggy to not be made the same way. So the very first Meyers Manxes were, I call them the monocoques. I only built 12 of them. They were all fiberglass. There's one here today, and it's right next door at the next tent, the blue one. It's a very rare. There's only, I think, 5 or 6 that we've identified from the 12. And that's one of them all restored. They're very, very precious. But they don't have a floor pan like all dune buggies do. And of course, I didn't trust myself too much because in the very first fiberglass dune buggy, the old red, the original #1, which I still have, I carried a gallon of resin and a roll of mat and cloth and some catalyst because I thought my ass would be dragging in the street somewhere. But as it turns out, that car set the very first records in Baja, beating the motorcycle records, which started off-road racing. So that car has a very unique dual history. It started the dune buggy craze around the world, as well as it started off-road racing, and it's recognized for that. There are several off-road halls of fame, in which I'm all of them. There's, I think, 5 of them. I don't know where they are either. they're just names. But Old Red is my very first dune buggy, made without a floor pan. It still exists. I take it to car shows a lot. I would have brought it here if it wasn't so damn far. And after that, the business grew. I grew from B.F. Meyers and Company was usually just me That's B.F. Meyers, and the dog in the doorway was Ann Company. So I did everything myself. The first cars were all handmade, of course, and I did every bit of it. I came out of a long experience of fiberglass sailboat building, so I know a lot about it very technically. I suppose the other thing, besides the background of the knowing about fiberglass, I also knew a lot about art because I'd spent many, many years in art schools. And so line and form and all that is a part of the experience. There was one other thing, was attitude. I think the attitude of the Manx is kind of a screw you, let's have fun. It's a wind in the face. It's a gathering up of youth. For those that are not youthful anymore, they're still hanging on to it. And for the youth. And it's a business of freedom, a sense of adventure. One editor wrote recently that the Manx was a piece of California culture. And back here in the East, he named some cities. We didn't have Malibu, we didn't have surfers, we didn't have blondes, but by God, we could have the Manx. And that's why they're here. They're just a piece of California culture. Unfortunately, most of them haven't been built with a lot of knowledge of chassis correctiveness. There's when you shorten a car that was a perfectly good car and it comes out worse, you didn't do anything right. You made it into a dune buggy, but the problem is it has a lot of handling characteristics that aren't too pretty. And there's nothing wrong. And it's not because it's a short car. It's because of a lot of other things. I just recently wrote an article called The Invisible Chassis, and it's all about that kind of suspension system, the Volkswagen suspension trailing arms and swing axles, and all their weaknesses, and why they corrected some of the weaknesses later in the years with the IRS, as well as things like we take a perfectly good Volkswagen, which weighed a couple thousand pounds, we make it smaller and lighter, and then we put bigger wheels and tires on it. Well, what we just did was we gave the dog with a proper sized tail, we made it into a little dog with a bigger tail. So now the tail wags the dog. So we went backwards a little bit.
You might first tell me the advantages.
The advantages?
The advantages, then you can tell me.
Well, Winnie points out something good. At a couple of shows ago up in Michigan, a guy came to in a huge crowd of people. Aha, Myers, you really screwed up when you shortened that thing, didn't you? I said, no, there was several advantages. The advantage of shortening the car was, first of all, whenever you shorten anything, you made it lighter. If you made it shorter, it's also, as a beam, it's stiffer, it's stronger. The next thing you did was you made it have a shorter turning radius. It has a better belly clearance. But the biggest thing of all is you brought the live ballast, the people, the driver and his partner, back towards the rear axle, which gave it more traction. And we know that an engine behind a transmission and the people right in front of the transmission centers all that weight on the rear wheels. The car is really phenomenal off-road. If you don't play with them off-road much, you don't really appreciate what they're all about. Out where we are, we have a dune buggy club with hundreds of cars coming to these runs, and we climb into these canyons with big boulders and all that, and we bash about, and the cars are like little tractors. When you put a great big pair of tires on them and enough power, why they just do anything. They'll go where Jeeps wouldn't believe you could go. I've been to lots and lots of places where people couldn't take a Jeep, and then we took a two-wheel drive Manx and climbed the same hill. But there's a lot of skill in that too. So the point I'm making, though, is that the car, you turned it into a little tractor for off-road. On the highway, it gets kind of twitchy, and people think it's only because you shortened it. It isn't the shortening. It has nothing to do with it. It's mostly because you put great big tires on it, which changed your weight to unsprung weight relationship. You should have a large sprung weight to an unsprung weight that should be very small. That's the unsprung weight of the parts that go up and down, the wheels and the tires. So what you did was you increased the unsprung weight and you reduced the body. So you've gone backwards in that ratio. But all I'm trying to say is that if you'll take note of, first of all, don't let a swing axle droop too far or go up too far. Limit it. You can do that in all kinds of ways. You keep the axle movement up and down somewhat limited in a swing axle car. In a IRS rear engine car, you'll have a better control of the wheels. When a swing axle, let's say it dives into a fast curve and you put your foot on the brakes, well, the thing goes up in the air. Well, what you just did was you brought the wheels closer together on the ground. The center of gravity went up. So there's this triangle, the base of which is the wheels. So they got narrower, and the weight of the car and the center of gravity went up. So your triangle became tall and skinny. So the thing flops over. The wheel tucks under. And on an IRS car, it doesn't happen. The wheels stay exactly where they're supposed to be. They don't move in and outwards more than about 3/8 of an inch. So the wheels stay at their same planted distance from each other, from side to side. That's the track. So that's why we like to see people use IRS chassis, because they're safer. They also have a softer movement. They've changed the spring rates. The front axles, there's not too much difference there, except that the ball joints are a little softer movement. There's another thing that people do. They put too wide a tire on the front. And what you've done there is you've ignored the axis of this kingpin. The axis of the kingpin has an angle to it. It aims at the tire patch on the ground. The center of the tire patch has this invisible axis from the kingpin, which aims right at it. When you put a larger wheel or tire outwards, then you move that center outward away from that. So you become something that pushes on your steering mechanism into your hands at the steering wheel. When you hit curbs or bumps, it bends things. It's harder on the whole system. So keeping the wheels somewhere where they used to be is where we like to see you keep the front wheels. If you stay with stock wheels, you can't do anything better, but they look like hell. But if you have a slightly larger wheel, it's not too bad, because the front of the car is now so light. It used to have 600 or 700 or 800 pounds for 4 people when it was a Volkswagen sedan. When you made it into a buggy, it now only carries 300 or 400 pounds. So it's good. You can use it maybe a 6 or 7 inch wide wheel. I wouldn't go any farther on the front. On the back, you can do anything you want as far as width goes. It doesn't got any effect on anything. But mainly, all that stuff that happens that makes you think your car's twitchy here's 2 other things. As you put big tires on the back and you shorten the car, you've undone the caster angle. The front end is not vertical. It's not 90 degrees straight up and down. The front end tips back about 3 degrees. Now, when you raise the back axle by the rear end by larger tires, you undo that negative caster. So the caster angle you've done away with by larger wheels. And if you pump it up more by liking it to be looking like a stink bug, it gets even worse. But there's an easy fix to that. There's a thing called caster shims. You can buy them in the Dune buggy store. MP sells them. And you loosen the 4 bolts on your front axle, and you slip these shims in the lower beam behind them, and you regain your caster angle. You'll find that the car straightens out. The reason I learned all this was in the very first Meyers Manx. It was on airbag suspension. The first 3 cars had airbags, and they were half the time they were going flat. And I put too much air in them and make them go way up in the air. And I noticed that when they were flat, the car was decambered with the back wheels up under the fenders, like a speedboat. You know, the butt was down and the front end was up, and the car went as straight as a die at any speed, wide open. And when you pumped a lot of air in the airbags and it came up, the back end then undid the caster angle. Are you with me? And when you get rid of the caster angle, you suddenly have a twitchy car. Plus which, the center of gravity went up in the air. So that increases the feel of twitchiness. You know, a dragster, a 300-mile-an-hour dragster, they have 3 and 4 times the caster angle that your family sedan does, because they don't care about anything except keeping it straight. So great big caster angles help the straight line. Getting rid of too much height in the rear end helps. Not too much width in your front tires. And of course, the last thing I can say on all of this is to make sure that your toe end adjustments, both front and rear, are important. You want 0 to 1/8. You can go more. You can go to 1/4. Dragsters use 3/8 on the rear axles of toe end because they know that under power, the whole thing flexes out to about straight to 0. because under power, they have so much power, they bend everything outwards. But our buggies can handle 0 to 1/8 of toe in. Never any negative toe in. You never want them to toe out. So toe out is deadly. It makes it twitchy again. So you can get rid of all the twitchiness with all these things I'm talking about. I wished I had here the article that I just wrote called The Invisible Chassis. It takes in all of this and it gives you lots of drawings and so forth. Hi, Chris. There's the guy that he owns a monocoque. That's a rare guy. He owns that blue monocoque out there. I tied a balloon on. First choice, Ruth. Of course, I think it's because it's an old car and I'm an old man and we love each other or something like that. It takes me back to my first thoughts about all this. You know, people say, why did you do it? Is that where we're going, Winnie? You know, I need her. You know, little boys draw airplanes and draw cars. And one of the great teachers at Art Center School in Pasadena, California said, little boys draw cars and airplanes and he doesn't know why. And I still don't know why, but I was one of those little boys. And I'm a tinkerer. It's fun to take things apart and examine why it works. I guess that's all of us here. You know, the other day, Winnie and I just bought a new Honda Fit. It's a little dinky station wagon kind of a car. And I need to tow a trailer with it. Well, if I tow a trailer with it, of course they're going to laugh because I'll probably undo all the warranties on the car or something. But I climbed underneath there and I said, oh, I can see how I do this. And there was a perfect answer and I did it. But you know when I did it? I did it almost the moment that I thought about it. I don't like to sit around. If I got an idea, I just jump on it and do it. And I've always done that. And maybe when I came home from Pismo and I started drawing pictures of dune buggies, I just started working on it. I always have a shop, tools. I'm working at a sailboat company at the time, but I started working on it at nights. And I finally quit the job and kept working on this thing. And a year later, I created the Meyers Manx. But I guess I'm a person that just has a little bit of stubbornness about when I get an idea, I just go for it. I don't know if there's any better answer. But I did it because I wanted to do it. The other thing was, besides the art background and the technical background of knowing about fiberglass in the sailboat building, I had the attitude because I was a surfer. And the surfer doesn't really give a crap about tomorrow's profit. He's not really thinking about saving anything for tomorrow. It's just living for the moment. And joining the big club that goes to work every day is not what he's all about. And I was probably that kind of a guy, too. So with that attitude and a sense of line and form and loving cars and wanting to build a dune buggy because I wanted to build my dune buggy, I think there's another thing about it. Whatever we do is probably what we will participate in with that way. In other words, if I work in fiberglass because I build boats, I'll probably build a fiberglass dune buggy. If you made a wooden boat, you'd probably make a wooden dune buggy, and I've known guys that did. They were wooden boat builders, and they built wooden dune buggies. You know, isn't that kind of natural? But most of us, the problem for probably the dune buggy is that it goes to the limits of what a guy can do in his shop. He can take straight tubing, and he can cut it, and he can weld it, and then he can cover it with panels and pop rivets. And that's why dune buggies look like they do, because it's at the extreme limit of the guy in the shop. He makes things because that's all he knows how to make it. That's the way he senses things. But I was more than that. I loved the forms from art school, teaching life drawing, and I gave it a sense of sculpture, I suppose. And you can do that with fiberglass. You can't do that with steel tubing, and well, you could if you're nuts, but but generally, a piece of fiberglass is you make a shape. It's called a plug, from which you polish it. You make a mold. You polish and wax the mold, and out of that mold comes a part. And that was the first dune buggy. So that's the way I approached it, because that was my work. And that's the only reason, I think, had I not been making fiberglass sailboats, I don't think you'd ever see a Meyers Manx. I patented it. And I went to the patent attorney, and And he said, well, here we have to do all these things, and you have to search for a year, and you pay your money. And they took my money and found that, yes, by God, there was nothing like it. So here's your patent. And it cost me $1,100 or something, 40-some years ago. And I have a patent. Today it's a collectible. People buy them on eBay and put them in frames because I went to court and tried to protect the patent because people were copying the car. Actually, they were copying it all over the place. I didn't know how much. But a few of them were starting to appear, and so I took them to court, and I lost in my defense of my patent. I think the other guy's attorney was just smarter than mine, because that seems to be what it was all about. I didn't understand it. Today, I wished I had the chance again. I would have gotten up and made a lot of noise, but the judge ruled against the patent, invalidating the patent as it shouldn't have ever been patented. Invalidating the patent invalidated Bruce Meyers. So that opened the doors, the floodgates. Across this country, there was over 50 people making fiberglass dune buggies of one kind or another. Most of them looked like the Meyers Manx. All of them came from the Meyers Manx because there's a DNA that I can attest to. When you ever walk up to any kind of a plastic dune buggy, go look at the fender wells. They're made from, when I was building the plug, and there was these two fender wells, these two gaping holes, and I'm looking at the backside of the rear tires. I'm saying, what am I going to cover that with? Well, I stepped outside, and a friend of mine had a pickup truck, an old 46, 47, 48 pickup, Ford. And on the front two corners of the hood were the perfect round shape that I liked. He threw me the keys and said, here, go use it. And I never drove it anywhere. I just put some Vaseline on the front corners of the hood and put some plaster on that and took that in and made a couple little fiberglass parts and stuck them into the plug, and those became the fender wells for the world of dune buggies. And everywhere I go, and when I've been to Australia and France and Holland and England, Europe, across this country, every dune buggy you look in, there's the Ford pickup truck's front quarters over the back wheels. So I know that they had to start with the Meyers Manx. The mechanical aspect of the Meyers Manx is the covering that covers the body underneath, or the frame and chassis. And to hop around and jump over all that metal stuff, you have to have certain bumps. You can't get away from it. There's unavoidable things you have to do to make that shape. And so when you look in any of these books from England, there's 4 of them. Most of the books you look in, you'll see the Ford pickup truck's front hood corners over the back wheels. So I know that they came from the Manx. The Manx crossed the ocean, and it was copied all over Europe. And we'd been there. Winnie and I led a parade of 1,100 cars around the Le Mans racetrack. 400 of those cars were plastic dune buggies, all of which had my wheel wells inside the back end. So we know where it all came from, don't we? And it's kind of an I told you so, I suppose. But the whole point of that was that I became very, very bitter. And in the trying to maintain the company. We had a company of 60 to 80 people, had a trucking fleet, 200 dealers across the United States. I used to build 25 kits a day, sometimes. We had a big deal. We did what would today would be 35 million annual gross volume. 10 times today, it was about 3.5 million annual gross volume. So it was a big deal. I'm just a beach boy, you know. Where in the hell did I come from to come up with something like that? But the world ran off with it, and I couldn't compete because I had such an overhead. I had to have $208,000 a month to keep the doors open. Pretty scary. But you can do it when you build 25 kits a day. And that's what the whole thing was geared to. And when they could produce something for less than my cost, I had no place to put a profit. And they copied me all over the place. So that's what happened to the Meyers Manx. It came apart at the seams because I lost in the courtroom. In the downfall, in trying to maintain the company, keep it alive, I got very inventive. I thought, what could be something that's fiberglass about the size of a dune buggy? Because I had a shop that was created just for that. I had these spray booths and all this stuff. And I dreamed up the fiberglass hot tub. Everything is empirical. Nobody ever really creates something in a vacuum. empirical means it's an addition to something that already exists. There were wooden hot tubs. They were in Hollywood homes. They were made in Sweden or someplace. A wooden hot tub was just a big tub. But I decided, why don't we make it out of fiberglass? So I did. And I sold it to, a lot of them, to a local tub guy, a swimming pool distributor, and he just didn't make anything happen, and the thing died. Along the way, I had this big vacuum form machine, so I invented the pickup truck bed liner. And I couldn't talk my own people into the fact that people wouldn't like to have scratches inside their new pickup truck. And I had to go and do that by myself. I ran a little shop across the street, went over there and worked on it at night by myself. And at the end, I gave it off to my man that was the head of my vacuum forming division. And he ran with it. And about a year and a half later, well, here we have pickup trucks with plastic bed liners. Another thing I did was a thing called the Night Racer. It's a little race car that looks like a McLaren race car. And it's little boys sleep in it. It's a bed, but it looks like a McLaren race car. And we used to sell them in Barker Brothers, a big furniture store out there in the West. All those things I created, but still they needed more development because they were the first offs. When you try something new, often there's something you didn't quite hit the target. You can go back and try again. And so they needed development and they needed more money. And of course, we were running out of money. And so everything died, and I went out, and pretty soon the whole thing went off in a terrible auction. I went to an auction of my own company a year and a half later, and here's all this stuff, all my show cars. The show cars didn't have pistons in their engines. The instruments were faulty. The windshield wipers were just a nut and a bolt holding a windshield blade. But they looked great. They were beautiful, and they had a lot of chrome on them. But they were being sold for $10,000. And the guy didn't know there was no pistons in the engine. I wasn't with the company then, yes. I'd left. At that point, I was working for Malcolm Bricklin, and I designed the Bricklin sports car. Ugh.
I got one.
You have one? Oh, you poor devil.
I got one at 75, one of the good ones, 75.
Well, anyway, that's just a part of my life. But what I did was I became very bitter. And I spent the next 20-some years of my life just... I didn't want to go to an off-road race. I didn't want to hear about dune buggies. I worked with my hands. I used to loft sailboats and build them, and I did that for a man for a time, and I restored a Rolls-Royce limousine with Winnie, and we did a lot of crazy stuff. I was invited 15 years ago to France by Jackie Morel, a wonderful French guy that has a publishing company, and he produces a magazine called Super VWs, and he has a thing called the Super VW National. He does things like at that time he rented the Le Mans racetrack in France. That's something. And there was 15 countries and 15,000 people with Volkswagens of every kind. And I led a parade around the Le Mans racetrack. Okay. At that point I was very, very bitter. Jackie said, "You're very angry?" I said, "Yes. I've been screwed. The world has taken advantage of me." He said, "Well, that's your choice." "What do you mean, Jack?" He says, "To be happy is simply a choice. We all have something we can be pissed off about. We can all bemoan some fate in the past." He said, "But if you want to hang on to it, all you're doing is enjoying this miserable pain. And that's what you're doing. All you need to do is just pretend to be happy." I said, "Pretending doesn't cut it." He says, "If you do, you will find that it'll change your life." I did. You know, it's like opening the doors. The sunshine came in, and I'll be damned. When you're negative, you push people away. You become lonely. And the lonelier you get, the more negative you are. So you're in this downward spiral at your own man-made hell. But if you want to be happy, if you have to pretend, just do it. Try it. Be a happy guy. You know what happened? The doors opened. The people came. He said, "Go home and do 3 things. Build a new Manx of the 90s, that's the Manxter, the 4-place car. Start a club, which we did, the thing's over 3,000 members. And write a book, which is partially done." I have a lot to say. I'm not sure how big this book is going to be. But what it did was it changed my life. because you can't make me unhappy. Do anything you want. No, I've chosen to be happy. And what it does is it simply changes your life. I guess that's my message for the day. Thank you.